Hi friends, host Eric here, host of Talking with Famous People. I'm here today with my beautiful wife Rachel, and I'd like to discuss the issue of IQ and cognitive functions, and IQ as a modality of understanding people. So, I had a conversation yesterday I guess it was, with somebody, Cedric, I believe it is, on the live stream, who was a proponent of IQ test and Big Five test in that they quote unquote have predictive powers, and I've discussed this issue to some length already, but there's a new angle I kind of want to bring onto the question, which is this. So let's assume that in fact those so-called predictions that are made by IQ test are meaningful. That in fact we can conclude that if you've got an IQ of 120, you have a very low likelihood to be found in Mbti field of astrophysics, whereas if you've got an IQ of 160, you have a much higher likelihood of being found in Mbti field of astrophysics, or something like that. Okay. Or let's say instead you frame it as things people are capable of. In order to be capable of Mbti, you have to have an IQ of Mbti. Okay. So the thing is, the way it's actually utilized, IQ, by human beings, is it's utilized to either describe people, it's utilized to justify conclusions, or it's used to describe populations and or justify conclusions about populations. So the thing is, you may have heard statistics about people from sub-Saharan Africa having scoring lower on IQ tests or something. Now this is a demographic reality that basically groupists try to use to cast disdain on the group that they feel like they have disdain for. But the reason why IQ is useless, of course, is for exactly that purpose. I mean, for exactly that reason, which is you can't use it without using it backwards. So, for example, if I tell you have high verbal reasoning skills, then it's plausible to say, we're looking to hire a lawyer, we're looking to admit somebody to law school, we need somebody with good verbal reasoning skills, okay? The problem is, that correlates sort of with IQ, but IQ purports to measure something more general than that. So you can't use the IQ score, whereas you might be able to use the verbal reasoning score. Let's say you are to discuss some sort of group, like people from sub-Saharan Africa, in a dismissive fashion, or point out or highlight the fact that population or that geographic area scores lower on IQ scores or something. So what's your point? It's still quite plausible that the most intelligent person in the world is from that area. It's not indicative of that you should therefore be justified in treating individuals from that area not as individuals, but as members of their groups. Or if you go in with that, armed with that knowledge, and assume this person you're talking to is stupid because they're from this given geographic region, you might be in for quite a surprise. In other words, it's not a good heuristic for any actual decisions that people have to make. To the extent that people use it as a heuristic to make decisions, they are doing a disservice both to the thing they're trying to decide and to the person they're deciding about. If I'm an HR person and I'm using IQ test scores to hire, then I'm really missing the point. There's almost nothing that one can imagine hiring someone for in which the actual skills that are required to perform well at that job link that closely to somebody's IQ score. In contrast, you can, as indicated, find a strong link between capacity to do a job and, say, verbal reasoning skills, because verbal reasoning skills are a specific thing, whereas IQ is not. Now, same as such with the Big Five. If I were hiring and I was looking for somebody with high conscientiousness scores, then presumably I'm looking for somebody I have some specific job that I've linked to that, right? But whatever job it is that I've linked to that, unlike with the verbal reasoning example, consciousness is too vague a notion and too dependent upon that which others deem or you deem you're supposed to be doing, right? Without that being defined, it's very difficult to understand what consciousness means. If you're looking for somebody with high openness, well, like, what kind of job requires that? And are you really going to make your decision on Big Five scores? If you're saying, like, it's just there to eliminate people who aren't personality-wise well aligned for the job. In other words, it's there to eliminate all the introverts because only extroverts can do this job. Well, okay, probably you're constraining your understanding of how human beings can adapt and adjust and bring a lot of different factors into a given workplace, right? So how does cognitive functions differ? Well, with cognitive functions, we're not describing a person in terms of a general attribute that they don't actually have, but purports to represent some quality of theirs that is desirable. Instead, we're describing things that manifest on a teeter-totter way, right? So if I'm saying I'm very creative, I can't also say that I'm very good about keeping track of all of my ideas, because the two things naturally run afoul of each other. If in my introverted sensing I'm keeping track of things that have happened before, things I've said before, things other people said, etc., the quantity of things that I have to keep track of and the quality of keeping track of them are going to be inversely proportional at some point. At least there's going to be a point where you tip the scale and say too many things to keep track of, right? So instead, we've got this frame of reference where people are hiring, asking questions like, what's your biggest weakness? And getting answers like, answering this question? I'm just so great at everything that answering this question is my greatest weakness. But in reality, of course, they're not describing themselves accurately or thinking about attributes or skills accurately at all. If they were, they would be saying, well, because I'm really good at this, I'm necessarily weak at this, or I'm not necessarily going to display in the following fashion in this way. And that would be an accurate kind of way of self-describing. But instead, we're asked to uphold the standard where everybody needs to be great at everything and have no real weaknesses. I try too hard, I'm too much of a perfectionist. I just can't leave work. I'm so enthusiastic about doing it. Those are the kind of weaknesses people report in interviews, you know. What's your greatest weakness, Rachel? Being too beautiful?
Oh, thanks, babe.
It is. It's her greatest weakness.